You know that person who, when an argument breaks out, just stops. No yelling, no defending themselves, no long speech about why they're right. They just go quiet, and somehow they're the most unsettling person in the room. Everyone else is talking louder, getting redder, throwing words around like weapons. And this person? Silent, still, almost bored. Here's what most people get completely wrong about that moment. They assume the quiet person has nothing to say, or that they're too weak to fight back, or worse, that they've already lost. Psychology says the opposite. The person who chooses silence over argument isn't retreating. They're operating from a completely different psychological level than everyone else in the room. And today we're going to break down exactly what that level looks like, trait by trait. Trait 1, verbal economy. Most people treat an argument like an auction. The louder you bid, the more you're worth. But there's a psychological principle called the scarcity effect, and it applies directly to words. When you speak constantly, when you explain yourself over and over, when you justify every decision to everyone who asks, your words lose weight. They become white noise. The person who goes quiet has figured out, often the hard way, that silence is the rarest response in any conflict, and rare things carry value. They're not staying silent because they have nothing to say. They're staying silent because they've already done the math, and the cost of speaking outweighs the return. Psychologists call this verbal economy. High-functioning communicators produce fewer words, but each one lands with more precision. The quiet person in an argument isn't losing the exchange. They're conserving ammunition for the moment it actually matters. Trait 2, the silence trap. This one is subtle and honestly a little bit ruthless. When you go silent during a conflict, something happens to the other person almost immediately. They start to feel uncomfortable. The silence needs to be filled. So they fill it, usually with more words, more emotion, more information than they intended to share. This is not an accident. People who go quiet in arguments have learned, consciously or not, that silence is the most powerful conversational move available. Because the human brain cannot stand an empty space. It panics. It rushes to fill the gap. It says too much. Psychologists call this the interview effect. Detectives use it. Therapists use it. Negotiators use it. When you stop talking and simply hold eye contact, the other person's brain reads it as pressure and responds by talking a lot, uncontrollably. In other words, the quiet person isn't losing the argument. They're watching the other person argue with themselves, which, if you think about it, is the most efficient outcome possible. Trait 3, internal compass. Here's the real reason most people can't stay quiet when they feel attacked. It's not because they have important things to say. It's because their sense of self-worth depends on being understood, on being seen as right, on winning the room. The moment someone misrepresents them, accuses them, dismisses them, gets the story wrong, there's a biological spike. Cortisol floods in. The brain registers it as a threat to identity, and the mouth opens. People who go quiet have done something genuinely difficult. They've separated what they think of themselves from what others think of them. Psychologists call this internal locus of evaluation, a term coined by Carl Rogers. It means your sense of value comes from inside, not from the verdict of the person across from you. This is not something you're born with. It's built, usually through a long string of arguments that people wish they'd never started. Trait 4, the iceberg effect. Let's be honest. When someone goes quiet in an argument, the natural assumption is nothing is happening in there. Wrong. There is a lot happening in there. Research on high emotional intelligence shows that people who appear externally calm during conflict are often running intensive internal processing, tracking the other person's emotional state, modeling possible outcomes, evaluating the real cost of escalating, and deciding consciously what response will serve them best in the long run. They look unbothered. They are not unbothered. They are just efficient. Think of it like an iceberg. The surface is still, but 90% of the structure is doing enormous work underwater. invisible to everyone watching. The quiet person isn't cold. They haven't checked out. They're just processing at a frequency most people can't hear. And that leads directly to the fifth trait, the one that explains why the quiet person almost always walks away with more than they came in with. Trait 5, frame collapse. Here's the thing nobody tells you about arguments. They are not about facts. They are about power, about who controls the emotional temperature of the room, about whose reality gets to be the correct one. And here's the brutal truth about that game. The person who reacts more loses more, every time. When you argue back, you're accepting the frame the other person set. You're playing on their court, by their rules. You're confirming that their words have enough power to move you. When you go silent, you collapse the frame entirely. You refuse the game. And that refusal does something the other person almost never expects. It strips them of the one thing they were counting on, your reaction. Without your reaction, they have nothing to push against. The argument deflates. The power shifts, not dramatically, not with fireworks, just quietly, almost invisibly, in your direction. Psychologists studying social dominance hierarchies have consistently found that the ability to withhold reaction, what they call behavioral inhibition, is one of the strongest predictors of perceived social status. In simple terms, the person who reacts least is usually read as the person with the most power. That's not a game the quiet person is playing. That's just who they are. So the next time you watch someone go quiet instead of arguing, don't mistake it for weakness. Don't mistake it for having nothing to say. What you're actually watching is someone who has done the internal work most people never do. They've learned that not every fire deserves your fuel, that not every accusation deserves a defense, that the most powerful sentence you'll ever say in a conflict is sometimes the one you never say at all. If any of these traits felt personal, if you recognized yourself in that quiet person and finally understood what you've actually been doing, subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the psychology that most people walk past without ever noticing. And drop one word in the comments. Are you the quiet one? Or have you always misread the quiet one? One word. Let's see what this room is made of.